Welcome, everyone. We are so glad you all are able to be with us as we launch the newest resource available from the Health and Human Services Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnership, or as we like to call ourselves, the HHS Partnership Center. My name is Reverend Dr. Q English, and it is my pleasure to serve as the moderator for our event today. Let me start with some important, but perhaps startling facts. The United States had one death by suicide about every 11 minutes in 2021. For people aged 10 to 14 and 25 to 34 years, suicide was the second leading cause of death. Nearly 900,000 youth aged 12 to 17 and 1.7 million adults attempted suicide. An increasingly greater proportion of Black students report experiencing a suicide attempt in the prior year, more so than their white peers. It is troubling that suicide is a growing problem among young people, but we know that where there is darkness, light can bring hope. Light is hope in the darkness. That is why we developed the newest guide to help faith leaders help prevent suicide among our youth, because we know that they can bring hope and they can be hope for our young people. And this guide describes how they can do just that. Faith leaders can have a significant impact on youth, their families, and their entire faith community. So Hope, a guide for faith leaders to help prevent suicide, youth suicide, provides a faith leaders with guidance for identifying and helping youth who may be at risk for suicide. It encourages faith leaders to prepare ahead of time so that they are ready when or if a crisis situation presents itself. The guide shares critical protective factors and specific activities that can help protect young people from suicide. And in the event that a devastating event such as a suicide happens in your community, the guide helps faith leaders know how to respond to that situation as well. At the end of this guide, we take an important step by making sure that faith leaders take care of themselves as they take care of others. Our partner in this guide have been leaders at the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, as well as National Action Alliance for Suicide Prevention, and specifically their Faith Task Force. We at the Partnership Center are so grateful for their willingness to partner with us on this resource and help to get it out to leaders around the country. So joining us today, Brandon J. Johnson, who serves as the branch chief for the Suicide Prevention Branch at the Center for Mental Health Services within the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. Brandon, we are so grateful for your leadership, which informed this project. Turning the call over to you.
Dr. English, you're too kind. I could listen to you talk all day. Thank you so much for really just setting the stage for this. It's been an honor working on this project, working on this resource. And within the work that we do, there just isn't enough that we can do when it comes to community-based suicide prevention. There's so many different roles and sectors and things that people can do within community to help support one another. One of those areas that we really like to focus on are community-based settings, such as community-based organizations and also faith-based organizations. There are so many pieces of this when we think about comprehensive suicide prevention and the work that we can do collectively. Having faith leaders in position to help individuals move forward through crises, through tough times, through challenging situations, and through uncertain life events that come and impact us all. To have faith leaders be in position to address this, to help link people to resources, and to be able to help a young person and their parents navigate finding resources, getting connected to the mental health care system, and also building programming to help support young people. So many people in faith communities are already doing things that are kind of naturally protective. So supporting young people, giving them a sense of purpose, providing community, providing safe spaces for them to come and gather and talk to friends and be surrounded by people who genuinely care about them. As we continue to move this work forward, we wanted to equip just a bit further and educate a bit more around suicide prevention and how some of those things can be even enhanced to address social determinants of health. Many of our faith communities provide food pantries and transportation and, all sorts of other things to help individuals having challenges with substance use. There's so many places where we have natural helpers. And so and yes, I have it next to me. And what we envision for this guide is to really provide those next steps to have faith communities across the country be able to provide, more assistance and things of that nature. And so we also want to see this happen and move forward for the suicide prevention community. It's important for each of us, and we talk about this within our national strategy that we're currently updating as well, but wanting to connect the suicide prevention field to community. Right? Understanding where those partners are, understanding where we have built supports within communities that can help give our young people supports and help them to get through challenging situations and put them in positions to thrive. And so with this document, we see this as a resource that we can share quite widely around the country. So please, we want your help in that. Please share it with faith communities. Share it with folks working in suicide prevention, share it with your local AFSP chapters, your local NAMI community. There's so many places that we feel like this resource can help, and we're excited to see where it goes. And again, I want to send a special thank you to a couple of people really quickly. Ellen Harwell, Dr. Ellen Harwell, who's done so much work on this and moving it forward. Also, Dr. Chris Miller. This document would not be complete without them, and along with our connection and collaboration with the HHS Partnership Center. And so with that, I will pause. I will move out of the way. There's so many other amazing people that we have on today to really talk through this document and talk about places where we can support. And so with that, I will hand it back over to Dr. English.
Thank you, Brandon. And make no mistake, everyone that's on this webinar, he too is in that number of amazing people. So thank you again for your leadership in helping to create this resource. So we are also pleased that we have been able to work with this project with the National Action Alliance for Suicide Prevention. So joining us now to talk about the work of the Action Alliance and the value of this resource is Colleen Carr. She is the director of the National Action Alliance for Suicide Prevention. Colleen, I also want to thank you and your team for working with us on this important resource. Colleen, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Reverend Dr. English, for your amazing and collaborative leadership at the Partnership Center. We've been delighted to work with you guys on this youth guide. I want to start by thanking SAMHSA and the Suicide Prevention Resource Center for their support of the Action Alliance's Faith Task Force. And I want to especially thank Reverend Arnold and Brandon Johnson, who are both with us today, and all of our Faith Task Force members for their work over the last decade to really curate and develop seminal resources and messaging guidance and strategic direction to really support faith leaders and faith communities working to prevent suicide. The National Action Alliance for Suicide Prevention is the nation's public-private partnership for suicide prevention. We were stood up in 2010 and bring together national partners from across the federal government and from the private sector to align and strengthen our nation's suicide prevention response. We serve as a convener and a catalyst for suicide prevention across diverse sectors, from healthcare to business to entertainment, construction, sport, research, public safety, and more. And from the beginning, faith has been a community that we have worked with and really activated around. Faith leaders and faith communities have always been on the front line of suicide prevention in communities across the country. But what's new is the conversations that are happening and the actions and the coordinated outreach and leadership that we're seeing, and the opportunity and that's there to really support individuals and communities in crisis is called out in our national strategy for suicide prevention and in the Surgeon General's call to action to implement the national strategy both recognize the critical role that faith communities and faith leaders play. So could not be more delighted to be here today. We also know youth mental health has never been a greater priority or a greater need for our communities than it is today. And faith leaders do play that pivotal role in supporting youth and their families and in creating welcoming, safe communities for youth who might be struggling. This guide, which we're really delighted to be partnering on the launch today, is the latest addition to a suite of Action Alliance resources that have been developed for and by faith leaders from diverse traditions. So I just wanted to mention a few other resources. The Suicide Prevention Competencies for Faith Leaders, which is really developed to help equip faith leaders with capabilities to prevent and provide care and comfort to those affected by suicide. The Faith Hope Life campaign, which is online. It includes faith-specific resources, sermon starters, prayer guides, other resources to support faith leaders' own mental health. And then, of course, what we're here to talk about today, Hope, a guide for faith leaders to prevent youth suicide. I want to close before handing back with just a gentle reminder, as others have already echoed, that as adults serving youth, we also must support the mental health needs of those who are serving youth in our communities if we want to sustain the progress and really support those doing the work. We need to model help seeking as adults in the community and ensure mental health is a priority for the entire community, of course, including our youth. So I want to thank you again, Reverend Dr. English, SAMHSA, the SPRC, all of our task force members, past and present from the last 10 years, and Dr. Harwell, who Brendan mentioned, leads our Action Alliance Faith Task Force. And thank all of you who took time out of your busy day today to be here, to learn about the guide. I want to thank you for everything you do in your communities each and every day. I will turn it back to you, Reverend Dr. English.
Thank you, Colleen, and thank you again for your partnership. Before going any further, it is important for the center that we not just talk about our youth, but that we talk with our youth and young adults. That is why I am excited to turn the call over to Jibril Jaka. Jibril is 24 and was connected to us through the All Dulles Area Muslim Society Center in Virginia, also known as the Adams Center. Jibril is an Eagle Scout who does work in his community, including talking about the importance of addressing mental health. Jibril, please share with us why you think it is important to have faith leaders address suicide prevention, including in your own Muslim community.
Thank you very much, Reverend Dr. English. Thank all of you for having me, and welcome everyone who is watching. As mentioned, my name is Jibril Martinez Jaka. That was a very nice introduction. I appreciate it. I'm part of the All Dulles Area Muslim Society, as well as an Eagle Scout who is trained in wilderness first aid and CPR, in addition to being mental health first aid trained. That is the first point I'd like to make. The similarities that should be present between the awareness of physical health and mental health. On one part, you have the frequency. Taking care of your physical health is greatly encouraged, and being able to discuss those things that are physical health related is being more and is pretty destigmatized, as well as being told that it's important to have regular check-ins for your physical health. That connection there, in addition to mental health being more stigmatized in terms of the frequency and even reaching out, is one part that is very important to focus on, especially with youth. Because again, just like with going to the doctors, you don't want to just go when you are feeling ill. You want to make sure, right, the moment something happens, or even when everything is fine, you want to be checking it, right? And that's why faith leaders, especially as part of our communities, in order to reach out to our youth, it is very important for them, because they are often a first point of contact for youth. And if those discussions are being destigmatized and you feel like they can reach out, that is a huge part in terms of reaching out and being made aware and feeling comfortable to reach out and to increase their mental health as well. One part that religious leaders and communities should be working on is applying the same level of awareness that we have physical health to mental health with the check-ins. Very often when talking about these startling statistics, like the fact that nearly half of teens report feeling hopeless, their best option for reaching out, like I mentioned, can be through the imams, pastors, rabbis, and etc., the faith leaders of our communities. So it is very important for religious leaders to be open to being more approachable when it comes to these kinds of topics. And that's one of the things that we're doing and talking about right here. Now, overall mental health awareness has definitely been highlighted a lot more in recent years, especially in specific focus towards youth as well. And I'm very privileged to live in a community where events where youth can specifically talk about these kinds of mental health struggles has been greatly encouraged through announcements and events and dialogues that help at the Adams Center specifically as well. But there is still a very heavy stigma surrounding the specific topic of youth reaching out about suicidal thoughts and religious leaders being ready to be those first aid administrators and to work specifically towards suicide prevention is very essential. The first step can be the hardest for someone who is struggling with those type of thoughts, suicidal thoughts. But for youth or any member of the community, that first step and having an immediate contact like a faith leader, being open to talk about the startling fact of suicide in our present day can be the difference between youth being guided towards help and prevention or them just simply feeling more isolated and sometimes thinking that it may be weak for them to reach out if they were turned away. All right. And about these suicidal thoughts, a lot of times that there is a very heavy stigma. Now, it's very important to understand the environmental factors as well of today that without a doubt have an effect on the suicide statistics that have been mentioned. Growing economic inequality, lack of prospects for youth and their futures can definitely contribute to these very devastating amounts of youth who are attempting or thinking about suicide, especially in very tragically and continued lack of acknowledgement of the inherent inequality that Black and Brown and other minority communities face is definitely contributing even more to them being more susceptible to these tragic situations. That is why it is imperative that these steps are taken by everyone here on this call, all of you watching today, all the faith leaders as well. Your support and leadership shown here is important, and this Hope Guide can help bring us to the point where this kind of dialogue and support for youth to be able to reach out is not new, but it would be expected and standard. That is the future we are trying to work on. And as a youth member of the community, I greatly appreciate everything that you all are doing, but there is a lot of work ahead. But it's very important to help people, especially the youth in our communities, to feel like they have an avenue where they can reach out and talk about these type of topics, mental health, checking in regularly, as well as reaching out to their faith leaders for dialogues, even one-on-one meetings to just talk about anything, especially suicidal thoughts that they may be having, right? Because that first step, just like I mentioned, just like in first aid, just like in wilderness first aid and CPR, that first step, it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be something right there to be able to stop the bleeding. And for youth especially, their communities and their faith leaders can be that first responder in terms of mental health. All right, so that is all I have for right now. Thank you very much. Dr. English, I will turn it back to you.
Thank you, Jabril, for those thoughts and reflections. And yes, there is a lot of work ahead and we need everyone to do their part. Now we're going to hear from someone whose voice is heard in the guide through her introductions in the guide to faith leaders. Reverend Talitha Arnold is the senior pastor at United Church of Santa Fe. She is also a founding member of the National Action Alliance for Suicide Prevention, as well as a co-founder for the Faith Communities Task Force. within the Action Alliance. Reverend Arnold, thanks so much for being with us. So I'm turning the webinar over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. English, and thank you all of those who've gone before me with your support for this endeavor. And thank you, Dr. English, for I think you described either that or Jabril described himself as being 24 years old. Disclosure here, I'm not 24 years old. I'm a little bit older than that. But however, and I want to begin my remarks with this. I was 16 years old before I learned how my father, who had died when I was 2, had died, and that, at least according to the report, he had died by suicide when he was a patient at a VA hospital in Southern California. I was a few years beyond that. I was actually 12 when another family member started having significant mental health issues. And throughout that time, my family was involved in a United Church of Christ congregational church in Tempe, Arizona. But I never heard words like suicide, mental health, schizophrenia, any word, depression, ever spoken either from the pulpit or in education classes, certainly not in youth ministry. And in fact, I don't think I heard any of those words spoken in a church setting, my primary faith community setting, until I was 28 years old. And I was the person who gave a sermon on mental health issues. And my experience, which I think has motivated me to be involved in this work, not as a pastor and as a youth leader and as a camp counselor and college, university chaplain, et cetera, over my actually decades of pastoral ministry. My experience as a young person, either that 12-year-old or that 16-year-old or even that 28-year-old, was that when my faith community or any faith community couldn't talk about mental health issues and certainly couldn't even name suicide or other mental health issues, then it felt like God couldn't talk about it either. And that silence was deafening. It was not only a mental health crisis, caused not only a mental health issue, it was also a spiritual issue. How could the giver of life not be able to talk about those very crucial elements of life? And so, my friends, that's, I think, one of the reasons why this incredible life-giving work has been so important in my pastoral ministry, and also why I've said yes to the various opportunities of serving on the National Action Alliance, being involved with helping get the Faith Communities Task Force started, those kinds of things over the last really 13 years. Because one of the things I also know as a pastor within a particular spiritual tradition is that no matter what our spiritual tradition is, no matter what our faith tradition is, no matter what name we use for the giver of life, that sometimes we call God or Allah or by a host of other names, that we have a moral obligation to, in the name of that giver of life, to be about talking about life and helping to prevent suicide, helping to prevent people who are struggling in those lives with mental health issues, either in their own lives or in the lives of their family or friends. And from the very beginning, knowing that faith leaders have been on the cutting edge, on the front lines, however you want to describe it, in dealing with mental health issues and also breaking the silence and ending the stigma. I am so delighted that this guide for youth ministry, not just for youth ministers, but for faith communities of all different backgrounds, is finally available, addressing the specific needs of youth and young adults when it comes to suicide prevention. And equipping in a very practical kind of way. The guide contains information about what to do what are signs of someone perhaps having suicidal thoughts or having difficulty with mental health issues, how to reach out to families, how to be aware, what to do if somebody presents themselves as being suicidal, or they have a family member or a friend in the youth group who is talking about suicide or showing signs of being suicidal, that what to do. The guide offers that kind of very on the ground kind of practicality, how to be prepared in advance, how to reach out to the wider community for support, to make partnerships with counselors and therapists and hospitals and other mental health providers, how to work with families and to help families in this time, how to incorporate an awareness of suicide, the need for suicide prevention, how to incorporate awareness, as Jabril was just talking about, that in the same way we pray for people who might have physical ailments or dealing with physical illnesses, we also can pray for people who are dealing with mental health issues. We can pray for them and for their families, and we can name, in the same way that we might hold up in prayer, praying for people who have a heart condition or broke their leg or have cancer. We can also hold in prayer those who are struggling with mental health issues, with schizophrenia, with depression, or with suicidal ideations. Anything we can do to break the silence and say, we can talk about these things here in this faith community, whatever the faith community is. And it also lets people know that that God, however we understand the giver of life, can deal with these issues as well. The guide is phenomenal in its overall approach and comprehensive approach, that it's not just the youth leader, it's not just the parents, it's everybody in the congregation, it's the nursery care provider, it's the office administrator, it's the leader of the congregation, it's all the lay leadership, and this guide will help every congregation do better at what we are called to do, which is to be about offering life. Finally, the guide also offers information that has been raised before about addressing the systemic issues of racism, poverty, genderism, all those kinds of isms that are detrimental to people's mental health, both individually and also in our communities. So I thank everybody, everybody who's come before me in this presentation today, and those who are following afterward. You all have done an incredible job, and let's keep it going. Thank you for so much.
Thank you, Reverend Otto. And I know I speak for many on this call, thanking you for your years of leadership in the faith community on this critical issue of suicide prevention. Next, we're going to hear from Justin Pollison. He serves at the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, but is also trained as a Christian counselor. Justin is going to help us consider why this resource is important to clinical mental health providers and the faith leaders they work with. Justin?
Okay, thank you so much. Yes, my name is Justin Pollison, and I serve on the Suicide Prevention Branch at SAMHSA. I have a degree in psychology, but I am also a seminary graduate. I have my master's in pastoral counseling, and I've been able to work over many years in both faith-based environments and more secular, traditional, professional counseling and mental health services. Personally, I'm very passionate about bridging the gap between the psychological and the theological to bring the world of mental health together with the world or worlds of faith, especially when it comes to suicide prevention. As many of you may know, mental health professionals receive little suicide-specific education or training in their graduate programs. Likewise, in their workforce training, their licensure process, supervision, etc., they don't get a lot of suicide-specific training and education, although hopefully that is changing. And the same is certainly true for ministry workers and faith leaders. I know that in my own master's program, I took one elective course that focused on crisis response, which included suicide. However, by that time, I had already worked for many years in mental health and suicide prevention, so I had a comfort and familiarity with the topic, but many do not. So beyond the more philosophical and framing aspects of this new guide, I truly appreciate that this guide is a practical tool that can be pulled up and referenced time and time again. So you don't have to be a suicide prevention expert, and you don't have to become a suicide prevention expert. This resource can be a cheat sheet for you. I know the topic of suicide can cause fear and anxiety for many people, including those who serve in a clinical, counseling, or professional helper type of role. But in this guide, there are practical steps and information that mental health professionals and faith leaders alike can use. Specifically, starting on page 14 of the guide, how to identify youth who may be at risk for suicide, these specific risk factors to look for. Starting on page 15, how to respond to youth who may be at risk for suicide, including a very helpful ask, support, connect, and follow-up model. And then beginning on page 19, what to do after a suicide death occurs. How can you address the community and prevent future risk and harm? So we recognize religious faith or spirituality is very important to a lot of people, including people who may experience a suicide crisis. And if you're working as a secular counselor, per se, in the professional mental health field, you might not always feel confident or comfortable about how to address that faith component of an individual you're working with. So I think another benefit of this guide is it can be an opportunity for you as a mental health professional to provide a more holistic response to a hurting or at-risk young person. And if you serve in a faith community, it can also help bridge that gap to the world of professional mental health services. So I'm very thankful that this guide has been created, and I hope it can be used to save many lives and equip many faith leaders. And that's it for me.
Justin, thanks so much for those thoughts and your perspective. Next, I am excited to share a key resource that works alongside our new guide. The Health and Human Services Partnership Center has been working with different communities to increase awareness of suicide prevention in their respective communities. We do this through public service announcements that include the voice of lived experience from leaders from that tradition and community. Our most recent video was developed for the Hindu community and developed in partnership with the Hindu American Foundation. We are going to share the video now, and then we will hear from Ramya Ramakrishnan, Director of Community Outreach for the Hindu American Foundation. Ben, can we start that video now?
When I was 9, my family lost my uncle, the eldest of his generation, and a source of guidance, wisdom, and joy to us all. As I've grown older, I've realized just how deep the tragedy is because we didn't lose him to a heart attack. He died by suicide. As a licensed clinical psychologist, as well as a Hindu American invested in my community, I've lost far too many family members and friends to the tragedy of suicide. From a young age to just a week ago, I've been slammed with the pain of losing people to a cause of death that feels so important to talk about and address.
When I think about the people in my life that I have lost to suicide and those who have survived suicide, the only thing the people that have survived suicide have in common is that they had one person, at least one person, that was available, present, that was there to listen, that was there to help them heal. And so that is why a service like 988 is so critical.
One of the most harrowing moments during my medical training involved getting a message on the patient portal late at night that a 19-year-old patient of mine wanted to end her life. I immediately called my patient, who had run away from home at age 18 and now felt like she had no place left to turn to. My patient was an immigrant who felt the strain of trying to live up to her family's dreams for her, ultimately running away but finding herself cut off.
The root cause of suicide is basically depression and anxiety. What causes depression and anxiety is the expectations that one has of the people, places, and situations. And when these situations confront us in life and they become too much to bear, what happens is we become depressed or anxious. But there's always tomorrow, and there's always the realization that people, places, and things are always changing, and there's always a light at the end of the tunnel.
From a Hindu perspective, suicide is heavily criticized. It would be a most unfortunate decision on anybody's part. Just as the physical body has ailments, sick, you go to a doctor, so too the mental body has ailments, depression, anxiety, fear, guilt. Just go and ask for help. If there's nobody, just call 988 and there'll be a person right there willing to help you out.
The 988 dialing code is just a first step towards strengthening and transforming crisis care in this country. It serves as a universal entry point so that no matter where you live, you can reach a trained crisis counselor who can help. 988 offers 24/7 access to trained crisis counselors who can help people experiencing suicidal, substance use, or other mental health crises. To reach the lifeline, people can call or text 988 or chat at 988lifeline.org. If you need suicide or mental health related crisis support or are worried about someone else, visit the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline's chat to connect with a trained crisis counselor.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ramya Ramakrishnan, and I'm the Community Outreach Director at the Hindu American Foundation. HAF is the nation's largest and oldest education and advocacy-focused civil rights organization established for the Hindu American community. I'm honored today to be one of the panelists and have this opportunity to address the audience. I want to thank the Department of Health and Human Services for collaborating with HAF to produce the powerful video that you all just watched. As we all know too well, our nation is going through a loneliness epidemic, and efforts like these are attempts to dispel the stigma surrounding mental health and start having more open discussions to address suicide and prevention strategies. Just last week, the high school my son attends lost a 14-year-old girl. This news shook our community hard, since it's never easy to process news of losing a young person. The questions that always arise after such a tragedy are, what could we have done differently? What could we have done better as a community that may have helped this young person feel that they could have talked their way through their problems? How can we support our youth, enable them to share their problems with adults freely and help them navigate their lives? Like Swami Sarvapriyananda has said so eloquently in the video, and just like how Jibril mentioned as well when he spoke, the human body has physical ailments like diabetes, hypertension, that people readily get treated for. Several people have mental health challenges that they need to seek help for, but they sweep them under the rug. Depression and anxiety don't discriminate among races, faiths, age groups, or social status. And our Hindu community too continues to be affected by suicides. Hinduism is an all-inclusive and accepting faith that teaches that all beings are equal and inherently divine. This is why we have always fully embraced and supported LGBTQ+ communities. One of HAF's policy priorities has been to be a leader to champion equal rights for all LGBTQ+ people and fight to ensure our laws and institutions protect and enforce their rights. Hindu Americans believe that we must address the negativity, hate, and prejudices that lead to suicide and work towards creating a harmonious society where everybody can thrive. Vasudeva Kutumbakam is a Sanskrit phrase found in Hindu scriptures, which means that the world is one family. What this really means is that we need to prioritize our collective well-being over individual interests. HAF is committed to doing targeted outreach to reach our youth through places of worship and educational institutions in order to help address the stigma surrounding mental health challenges. We are immensely grateful to Dr. English, Ben Odell, and the entire team for their leadership and the range of amazing resources they have created to help our youth. September may be National Suicide Awareness Month, but this work is so important that we need to work all year with the same commitment and passion to help prevent suicides and have meaningful conversations that yield results. Thank you, everybody. And once again, many thanks to the Department of Health and Human Services for organizing this much needed event and creating this wonderful resource guide that's going to benefit our communities in so many different ways. I'm looking forward to working with many of your leaders to continue this critical work. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramya. And thank you to the Hindu American Foundation for joining with us at Health and Human Services to create these important videos highlighting the voice of lived experience from the Hindu community. Next, I am pleased to turn the call over to two leaders who read through the guide and gave us feedback that this was a helpful and needed resource for leaders like themselves who work with youth and young adults on a daily basis. Reverend Tiffany Nagal is Executive Director at the Oklahoma campus of the St. Paul School of Theology and holds a range of other positions. Her husband, Tate Monroe, also joins us as a Director of Discipleship and Development at the Oklahoma United Methodist Church. They are going to share why this resource is needed and appreciated by leaders like themselves who work with youth and young adults.
Thank you, Reverend Dr. English. We are certainly glad to have been a part of this. I was certainly humbled when Dr. Ellen Harwell invited me to be a part of the process, getting to tell some of my stories and experiences, and then getting to review the materials that had been developed. In ministry, I've worked with youth and young adults for around 20 years, and I am finding that today's generation are facing different pressures and expectations than any generation before them, from social media to their exposure to politics and what they feel that the world is coming to. It's a lot more challenging than I ever would have thought when I was their age as well. And it has become something that has been hard for me to address. A lot of times in efforts to share about love and light, we forget to acknowledge some of the pain and darkness that many of them are experiencing. My 24-year-old son himself, over the last few years, has lost more friends who have died by suicide than he can count on both hands. And it's been a real challenge to comfort him as he grieves through those. Also, as a youth pastor, I have been approached with concerns from friends or siblings or even parents about someone that they know or even is in our own youth group that has been dealing with suicidal ideations. And it's something that catches you off guard a little bit. It makes it difficult to know how to address that right away and how to handle things appropriately, because it seems like such a precarious position to be in, such a sensitive and fragile topic that you want to be able to say just the right thing at just the right moment with just the right people. And this material and this resource that is coming out now is a very life-giving thing for those of us that have to address some of these and these questions. Even those who have considered or have died by suicide that have approached us themselves are now someone that we are able to talk to more frankly and directly without fear of saying the wrong thing, because we are able to address it with materials that have been developed specifically for these situations.
In my work, both as a pastor in local communities, but also now in the academy, what we find is that many pastors have a heart, many faith leaders have a big heart for those in their community, especially our youth, but people of all ages who are suffering on many levels. One of the challenges that faces us is knowing exactly how to respond. And that fear on not wanting to do harm, wanting to say the right things, wanting to be a part of a healing process or help someone in need, just not wanting to get it wrong, that fear often causes us to freeze. This guide is so helpful because it offers information, additional resources to those of us in our faith communities who are leading in a variety of different ways. These resources equip us to be prepared for what we hope we never have to encounter. But the realities of our world today are making it very clear to us we're having to encounter them more and more and more, and not talking about them is no longer an option. Sharing these resources with students in religious programs and variety of different academic settings, along with being able to share it within your own collegial network and faith cohorts, is a very pivotal way of helping to share this information and help save lives. We've encountered many situations in ministry together, even within our own family, where these questions came up and we felt ill-equipped. Being able to share bits of this guide so far with students that I encounter, and I cannot wait to share the whole guide with them, is helping them. It gives them a breath, be able to exhale and feel like they're walking into a mission field with a tool that they can lean on at any moment. That's priceless.
Thank you, Reverend Tiffany Monroe, correction to the name, and Tate Monroe. It is indeed important to not only talk about hope and light, as you said, but not to fear the conversation around darkness and hopelessness. And we have the opportunity to address this head on. And the Hope Guide was created to do just that. So now let's open it up for questions from our listening audience. At this time, if you have a question, to please drop it in the chat and we will address them. Let's see if we have any questions that have come in so far. Okay, we have a few questions here. First question from Patty Phillips. How do we expand our influence and get the word out to our churches? If our panelists at this time all can come on camera so that we can participate in this segment. And Dolores, to your answer, yes, you can share the Hope Guide with parents. We encourage you to do that. So that first question, panelists, who wants to take a stab at that first question? It's open to all. How do we expand our influence and get the word out to our churches?
I could
go for it.
I think one of the things I like about the guide, and I think it's been our approach with faith communities throughout this whole process, is that this doesn't mean you have to start a brand new program. You can build on the things that faith communities naturally, normally do. Gather people together, give messages of hope, give people purpose, no matter what the tradition is. And so I think that is certainly, begin to integrate some of the wisdom that's in this guide into, how can it fit into an adult education program? How can it fit into a worship service? How can the volunteer kinds of things that churches engage people in, how can that also foster good mental health and address some of these things? If we come at it from the standpoint that, oh my goodness, we've got yet one more program our congregation has to develop, it's going to go the way of all flesh. But if we can affirm what faith communities, synagogues, mosques, temples, churches, whatever, are already doing and build on that, then I think that is a very appropriate way of getting the word out. Just putting up a poster, getting print copies of this guide in somewhere around the church for people to pick up, sending out to your congregation. Say, man, this is an incredible resource. Get it out there, and reach out to other faith communities as well. Mm-hmm. Those are all ways of don't be afraid to market it.
Thank you for that, Reverend Arnold. Another question that popped up. Yes, the guide will be translated in Spanish, so stand by for that. And yes, you are able to have hard copies sent to us, to you and your church ministry. If you would like a copy sent to you, please email us at partnerships@hhs.gov. It is also available to download. And we are able to send out mass copies. So please email partnerships@hhs.gov. Another question for the panel. How can our respective pastors get involved? I think Reverend Otto did touch on that a little bit. How do you start the conversation with a youth group that has not confronted this with adults before? I think that's a very important question. So,
Yeah,
Reverend Brandon, please.
yeah, I would love to jump in on this one. I think one of the approaches that I've seen to be really good is to just have the conversation where youth are already meeting and having dialogue. Like if you have like youth group sessions and supports and activities within your faith community that involve young people, talking about mental health, wellness, like taking care of yourselves in that arena, I think is a pretty good opportunity to do it. We even on page 18, like we have promote mental health and prevent suicide in youth, where it lists off some ways that faith communities can engage in a conversation and have those things as well. I think one of the things, to remember is that, they're having conversations about these things, whether or not they're having them with us and when we think they're having them. If you go on social media, TikTok and other places, not Facebook because they're not there much anymore, but, IG, TikTok and things like that, these conversations are already happening. And so it's important for us to understand that. And, if you're not fully comfortable, this is another thing we mentioned in here too, is collaborate with community-based organizations that do the work already, that can partner with you and can help you design something, who can attend, who can send, mental health clinicians and practitioners to be there to support as well. But, having those partnerships is great. Meeting them where they are, but having the conversation, they are probably way more prepared to have the conversation than you think.
Excellent. Thank you, Brandon. For people interested in this, how do we also get support to bring trainings to our churches and faith communities? This is a project I am currently working on. This is being presented by Patricia, working on and presented at the Diversity Leaders Fellows Academy, organized by the African American Behavioral Health Center of Excellence. I know Brandon group does training, we provide training. So Brandon, I think they should just reach out to us and I'll let that, and then we can reply from there.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good way to do it. We can definitely help do that and connect in that way. And I know AFSP and Soul Shop does some trainings as well. So we can for sure keep them connected.
Okay, we'll do. Let's see what else we have. Share with youth. Okay, will there be a summary document to share with youth and young adults as peer supporters of friends to share amongst peers and others at risk? Less training for leaders and more tool to hand out connected to this training document. Thank you so much for all of this. That's something to think about. Right now, we don't have just a summary document, but I'm sure there's a one-pager that can be created. But it'd be great to, as Reverend Arnold had mentioned, to just spread the word far and wide. Share the link, post it on your social media. If your pastor, if you're here representing a house of worship, feel free to share it with your pastor. And again, we can send out mass numbers of the toolkit as well.
There's also, we also on the website, on the Faith Hope Life website, are some webinars that we've developed over the last number of years that are interfaith and that deal with, not specifically necessarily with youth, but with faith communities as a whole. What's the role of faith communities in this work? And also the Muslim Mental Health Institute with Dr. Fahra Abbasi, has done a tremendous amount of work on, at least from the Muslim tradition, in terms of faith communities and mental health. She sort of wears a couple different hats as both a professor of psychiatry, but also deeply rooted in her own faith community, and the National Muslim Mental Health Institute is very helpful in that. Another way, and also on the Faith Hope Life website, there is a video that we produced a few years ago on, it's only about 10 minutes long, on care for the faith leaders, again, across the board, in terms of in dealing with suicide or suicide prevention within their own faith community, because suicide raises questions that no other death does. And it raises spiritual questions, again, across the board. How can faith leaders take care of themselves, and also reach out for support in such times? So there are some resources on that Faith Hope Life website that are very much interfaith and ecumenical that might be of help to people.
Thank you, Reverend Arnold. We do have one last time for one question. What encouragement can faith leaders offer members who are concerned about someone's suicidal ideation, but feel they don't have sufficient spiritual training / experience to intervene?
Anybody else want to jump in before I get it?
Go ahead, Brandon.
I think Tiffany and
okay.
I'd like to say that everyone needs support and encouragement and accompaniment. Don't be afraid to offer to go along with somebody, to talk to someone. Even if you don't have that direct relationship, say, I'll be there with you for support. You can take the lead, refer to me as you need to. Being able to be a part of the conversation sometimes is exactly the strength that they need in order to hold those more intimate conversations. So just being an advocate and ally to somebody in that position is really powerful.
Okay, that was our time's up for all these amazing questions, and thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and thank you to all the speakers today. Let's give them a virtual hand clap, and thank you for leading with your heart, for desiring and looking to improve the mental well-being for all youth. You that are listening are champions too, because you took time out of your schedule to hear, to learn. And our hope is that you use and share this guide far and wide. To all that serve youth, there is hope. Remember, as long as there is breath, there is hope. So thank you for joining us. We're going to end with another short PSA created for the African American faith community in partnership with Choose Healthy Life that you can feel free to share with others. We will drop the links to all the Partnership Center PSA and toolkits, including our PSA for our Muslim community. And last again, as long as there is breath, there is hope. Thank you for joining us. I grew up with one of the most horrific statements that can be made in anybody's household, and that was, what goes on in the house stays in the house. And for me, and as a Black family, that nearly destroyed us. And it wasn't long after that, my nephew, 14 years old, hung himself. Wasn't long after that when you found my brother pushing a shopping cart in the middle of the street. Yeah, he was that one.
I'm the father of a suicide victim. My daughter was my only child. She was my heart, and she took her life. If there had been a helpline in that hour of crisis, it could have made a difference.
I've personally had to receive mental health and assistance. I've had family members who've received mental health, who've thought about suicide.
The significant number of folks who are attempting suicide, who have suicided, are young people between the ages of 13 and 19.
I have a friend who was very spiritual, loved the Lord, and who took her life And the biggest problem was at the funeral, all of us knew it, and no one could talk about it.
Growing up in a family of 15, I really do know what it means when individuals would say that what goes on in the home, stay in the home, because that's the way our parents really raised us.
Too many people are experiencing suicidal crisis or mental health related distress without the support and care they need. There is hope. The Lifeline works. It helps thousands of people overcome crisis situations every day. The 988 dialing code is just the first step towards strengthening and transforming crisis care in this country.
It serves as a universal entry point so that no matter where you live, you can reach a trained crisis counselor who can help.
988 offers 24/7 access to trained crisis counselors who can help people experiencing suicidal, substance abuse, and other mental health crises.
To reach the Lifeline, people can call or text 988 or chat 988lifeline.org.
988 is more than just an easy to remember number. It's a direct connection to compassionate, accessible care and support for anyone experiencing mental health related distress.
But we're at a moment in time now where we have to indeed break that cycle and be open to a number of things that are happening in our families, especially in the Black church.
You may be the person that stands between them and that ultimate irreversible decision.
Thank you for calling the Lifeline. How may I help you?